You know the exact feeling. You're lying there in the dark, just staring at the ceiling. You are completely exhausted, but your brain, yeah, it absolutely refuses to shut off. You toss, you turn, and it's like every single thought you've ever had is suddenly demanding your absolute undivided attention.
So, why exactly won't your mind just stop? I mean, why does our brain seemingly betray us at 3 a.m. when literally all we want to do is get some rest? To really understand this deeply frustrating midnight phenomenon, we need to look at a very specific kind of intrusive thought. It's something psychologists and writers have spent years trying to pin down.
There's actually this beautifully poetic definition from Thought Catalog for this exact experience. They call it a nighthawk. Basically, a nighthawk is a recurring late-night thought that you successfully manage to ignore all day long, only to have it hover and build a nest in your mind right when you're trying to sleep. It could be an overdue task, a nagging sense of guilt, or maybe just this looming, shapeless anxiety about the future. During the day, it's circling high overhead, completely out of sight. But at night, when everything else finally goes quiet, that's when it strikes.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because when that nighthawk lands, you enter what we call the 3 a.m. spiral. Your brain just starts rapidly firing through this bizarre, totally disconnected web of anxieties. Like, one minute you're agonizing over getting Alzheimer's and wondering, wait, do I need to buy creatine monohydrate right now at 3:05 a.m.? The next minute you're deeply troubled by unconfirmed UFO claims. And by 3:15, you are suddenly dwelling on sociological studies about the ultra-wealthy suffering from a compassion deficit because their wealth isolates them. It is just a chaotic, relentless, and totally exhausting loop of information and worry.
But there is actually a clinical name for our nighthawks. In the world of psychology, this phenomenon is called perseverative cognition. This is defined as the repeated or chronic activation of the cognitive representation of psychological stressors, or in plain English, it's the continuous, unbroken thinking about negative events in the past or the future. And here is the truly critical part. This constant mental looping acts as a mediator, literally transferring psychological stress into actual physical disease.
This perseverative cognition usually falls into two distinct camps. On one side, you've got rumination. This is when you're constantly replaying past events in your head, agonizing over conversations and asking yourself, what if I had done this differently? On the flip side, we have excessive worrying. This is obsessing over future events that haven't even happened yet. You know, the classic, what if I fail spirals. Both of these types of overthinking are incredibly powerful cognitive traps. They're usually driven by underlying things like perfectionism, low self-esteem, or a really deep-seated fear of failure. You struggle to manage uncomfortable feelings, so your brain tries to logically solve them by just thinking harder.
And this brilliantly illustrates the literal midnight battle happening inside your head neurologically speaking. When you're overthinking, it triggers hyperactivity in your prefrontal cortex. That's your brain's reasoning and planning center, and it just goes into absolute overdrive. Then, your default mode network, or DMN, becomes overactivated. The DMN is usually active when we're at rest, but when it's overstimulated by stress, it traps you in this endless self-referential loop of worry. Finally, chronic overthinking completely disrupts the delicate balance between your brain's logical center and its emotional center, the amygdala. So your logic and your emotions end up locked in this exhausting war exactly when you are supposed to be powering down.
We really need to realize that these racing thoughts are absolutely not just in your head. They exact a severe, measurable, physical toll on your body. Look, when your brain perceives danger, even if it's literally just an obsessive thought about a deadline at work, it throws your body into a constant state of fight or flight. We're talking increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure, and massive spikes in the stress hormone cortisol. Over time, this prolonged physiological stress response causes serious wear and tear. Clinical studies have directly linked this to long-term health issues like cardiovascular disease. The original stressor isn't actually what harms you, it's the continuous thinking about the stressor that keeps your body locked in the danger zone. Let's look at some fascinating data that measures exactly how this impacts us in the real world. A recent clinical psychology study analyzed a sample of 88 young adults, aged 18 to 40. Now, this demographic is facing immense academic, professional, and personal pressures, which makes them highly susceptible to this exact cycle of poor sleep and high stress. The researchers used 3 standardized tools: the Sleep Hygiene Index to measure sleep quality, the GAD-7 to assess generalized anxiety, and the Perseverative Thinking Questionnaire to measure overthinking. You can see the mean scores mapped out for this group right here, which really establishes a clear baseline for their mental rest.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this incredibly strong positive correlation coefficient right here, 0.728. To put that simply, the data absolutely proves that the more you overthink and ruminate, the higher your anxiety levels climb. They are mathematically locked together. And simultaneously, researchers found that this heightened anxiety heavily exacerbates poor sleep hygiene.
It creates what researchers rightly call a vicious cycle. Your racing thoughts and that overactive brain cause insomnia. You literally can't fall asleep because you are excessively worried. But then, that resulting sleep deprivation severely hampers your cognitive function the very next day. Without restorative rest, emotional regulation becomes so much harder. Your mood drops, you suffer from analysis paralysis where you can't even make small routine decisions like what to eat for lunch, and that diminished mental state leads right back into fueling even more anxiety and more overthinking the following night.
So how do we finally break this loop? Well, psychologists recommend a highly effective, incredibly empowering strategy that's summarized by a simple, catchy phrase: name it to tame it. This is the clinical practice of affect labeling. Studies actually show that simply identifying and naming your specific emotions out loud, or even just writing them down, actively lowers your physiological stress response. It builds your emotional intelligence and essentially helps pump the brakes on that hyperactive prefrontal cortex. By giving the worry a concrete name, you stop it from being just a shapeless, terrifying force in the dark.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. The next time you find yourself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., completely trapped in a loop of perseverative cognition, remember that you actually have the power to break the cycle. Identify the thought, acknowledge the physical toll it's trying to take on your nervous system, and actively label the emotion behind it. Take control of the narrative. So, what will you name your Nighthawk tonight?